a small introduction first. I'm Viva. I'm the UCL president of London Blockchain Labs. And it's an honor to have with us Arkham CEO Miguel Morel this afternoon to talk about his journey, his past, and how he has come to build Arkham as a successful startup. So yeah, Miguel, do you kind of want to do a small, I'm Miguel, I'm from Arkham?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Miguel Morel. I was born and raised in Philadelphia, and then I moved to San Francisco to start my first startup, which is called Reserve Protocol. We essentially built a decentralized stablecoin focused on emerging market economies, primarily those in South America, which were and currently are experiencing hyperinflation. They have really strict capital controls, which made it a very kind of prime economy to be able to bring in stable money. After this, I founded my current company, Arkham Intelligence, where we essentially focus on building de-anonymization, surveillance, and analytics technology for the cryptocurrency space, primarily by tracking public and private information.
So I'm aware that when you started Reserve Protocol, you had a few decisions in your life. Can you tell me about the events in your life that brought you to start the startup journey?
Sure. So while growing up, I always knew that I wanted to do something that was really impactful. And there were a couple different journeys that one can take in that direction. There's kind of things that can have a ton of impact locally. So for example, being like a doctor or something is like a pretty typical path for that. You want to have a really big impact in people's lives. So, they're sick, they come into your hospital or your clinic and then you fix them, right? Like that's really impactful. But, I wanted to do something on a grander scale. And so in terms of like impacting many, many more people, there's sort of like the next kind of path that I was considering was like politics, right? Like that's pretty interesting, can serve a very large kind of population, but generally seemed really kind of confined, not really that impactful, depending on how you look at it. And so in terms of the people that were actually impacting people by doing the most good for kind of like the largest population, I think it was very clear that entrepreneurship was the way to go generally. And so, after, meeting a number of different entrepreneurs, there's kind of, a number of people who have had a really large impact in my life, just generally trying to convince me to go into the startup world, to go into entrepreneurship. It really kind of became clear to me that building a startup was the way to go, and building a startup that could be, helpful to a bunch of people was also a really great way of making money. And so I found the best place to start startups in the US, which was San Francisco. I packed my stuff and that's when I moved.
And was your initial vision to start Reserve Protocol, as you said, like the fact of helping people? How did you kind of in your mind link, I'm going to help people and then I'm going to merge it with blockchain and create like crypto that's going to help them? Like, in your mind, how did you combine both of those?
Yeah, so I think the origin story behind the idea didn't even necessarily kind of start with cryptocurrency. I had a much kind of broader idea of just, okay, I want to do just entrepreneurship generally, and I want to start a startup. And so as an entrepreneur, there's a question of, okay, I want to build a business. What market do I want to build that business in? Like what, and within that market, what kind of idea am I going to have? Should I go into fintech? Should I go into biotech? Like what area should I go into? And so there are kind of like a general set of heuristics and principles that you can use as an entrepreneur to try and figure out where you should search for ideas. So that includes how fast is the market growing? How big is sort of the total target market? How much money do people make generally in those markets? And what are the competitors? What does the current landscape look like? Does it look like there's room for innovation and development here generally, right? You want to go into places that are really fast moving. There's a ton of prospective customers and people are making a bunch of money. And so back in 2016, it was really clear to me that crypto was kind of like the obvious choice for that, right? And so it wasn't as large as it is today, right? Like now it's a little bit more obvious that the market is enormous. I mean, it's between $1 and $2 trillion at this point. But back then when it was, probably closer, when I got started, probably closer to probably like 30 billion or so. What mattered more was less sort of like the total size of the existing market, but more how big the market could grow in the future and how much it had grown percentage-wise while it had been around, which was really, really fast. In fact, it outpaced the sort of growth of the internet when the internet was first getting started. And the total addressable market for crypto was obvious. It was all of money, right? So that seemed like a really great place to build a business. And so within that, you kind of, again, once you pick your market, you have to find, okay, what exactly am I going to build in this market for these prospective customers? And there it sort of, there were a bunch of things that we could have built. Obviously, people were like, building exchanges, building layer 1 protocols, et cetera. But we wanted to look towards what are sort of the biggest problems in the world and what are the biggest problems in sort of the cryptocurrency space. And so Nevin, who was my co-founder and is still to this day the CEO of Reserve and has done a wonderful job doing that, essentially, found that one of the biggest problems was, okay, well, there's a bunch of volatility within crypto, which has caused these new things called stablecoins to exist and become heavily popularized. But it turns out that outside of the crypto space, there is this problem of stability as well, right? There are a bunch of countries, like take, for example, Venezuela, Argentina, now Turkey is a really famous example, where the monetary policy has failed. And so that causes people to earn money and then need to spend it very quickly and not be able to save in their local currency or spend in their local currency or buy things in their local currency because the inflation has gone out of control. And so if you could build something that could limit the volatility within crypto, you could also do that for the real world. And so that was, a really highly impactful kind of business where if you could go out and you could change people's lives by letting them save in stable money, spend in stable money, and take remittances in stable money, you could have really direct impact and potentially make a ton in the process. And so that's kind of the origin story of how we went about building Reserve.
And it's quite funny because from what we've talked, you've told me that people in Venezuela are actually using Reserve as a way to buy like their burger at Burger King, which is insane. Yeah,
I think there's over 8,000 merchant partners at this point. It fluctuates in the rankings. On some days, it's the number 1 app in Venezuela for different kinds of financial apps. Some days it's lower. I think now it's in the top 10 for Peru. And so there's a number of different kind of use cases. But overall, there's over 500,000 people in the country who are receiving their payments in Reserve, paying for things in local kind of shops in Reserve as well, and saving money, which I think is really wonderful. They can completely opt out of their broken financial system and actually use crypto for good rather than for speculation.
Huge accomplishment.
Yeah, thank you.
And how did you move from Reserve protocol into finding the idea for Arkham Intelligence?
Yeah, so essentially during that time, we worked with a bunch of different kinds of partners, either in doing market research or in people who helped us kind of tokenize and expand our business overall. So during that time, I spent a bunch of time talking to traders and to market makers and a number of different partners. And one thing that kept coming up over and over again was kind of this idea of kind of compliance and of risk. And so with Reserve, kind of the way you can think about it is with any kind of cryptocurrency company or like institution, there is a responsibility on behalf of that company to limit the kind of illegal activity that happens on the network, right? And so as part of this, they need to track down, okay, who are the people who are using this product? What are they using the money for? Are they doing something incorrect with that, especially when you're dealing with very large amounts of currency, right? And so everybody, even as on an individual level, has this responsibility. Probably the most famous example of this is if you tried taking over, say, $10,000 or pounds or euros through an airport, you'd get stopped by the police. And they would ask you to fill out some sort of form or give them information on why you're moving that kind of currency. Now, imagine that you created a way for people to get basically like an infinite number of dollars, like with cryptocurrency, with no need to identify themselves, no need to create an account, et cetera. It basically creates this whole new almost loophole where people can move around this money. And so with Reserve, we wanted to be really careful about that and make sure that Reserve was primarily being used for good. We were in kind of all of the boundaries of the law, and that it wouldn't add additional friction to the user experience. And so as a part of that, I basically realized that this data infrastructure and intelligence problem was much greater than just compliance and risk, but actually that in the traditional financial system, there was this whole kind of entire piece of infrastructure that has been developed over the past 100 years of financial intelligence, financial analytics, and surveillance. And that was a really big business. And it goes from AML and KYC compliance to people who need data about how money is being moved around the globe with something like a Bloomberg terminal, right? And so if I believed that crypto was going to completely overtake the traditional financial market and be worth $100 trillion, being the key piece of sort of financial intelligence infrastructure for that market seemed like a really great place to be. And so I built Arkham basically with this premise that if you could go ahead and basically de-anonymize all of the activity, figure out who all of the different players were and what they're doing with their money, then you could sell to a variety of different customers with different use cases and build a really successful business.
But my thought here is like the popular narrative of blockchain and of the whole technology is that it's private and it's anonymous and no one really knows how to track you, and that's the appeal that many people get out of it. Doesn't Arkham goes against this ethos in general?
So I think my thinking about that question is that there are two narratives running in parallel in the crypto space. The first is the one that you just mentioned, which is that crypto is, completely private. It can be used for a variety of activities anonymously, including potentially even illegal activities. And that nobody knows who you are or what you're doing. And that's kind of like the whole premise behind Bitcoin and all of these other cryptocurrencies. The second narrative that runs in parallel to that is one of transparency. So we've created blockchains in order to have kind of like this public ledger infrastructure where anybody can see what everybody else is doing. Things are very kind of publicly auditable. And the whole point is kind of, transparency for supply chains or transparency around the money supply or transparency around, the economics, for example. And I think both of these things are true and they exist simultaneously. But at the end of the day, essentially what we're trying to do is to unify those two visions. And so it is true that everything is kind of captured on a public ledger. All of this activity, you can go onto Etherscan, you can go onto the Bitcoin blockchain, you can analyze all of this data yourself as just kind of like an on-chain analyst, either as an amateur or a professional. But it's also true that a lot of that data that exists in those public blockchains or on Etherscan is not super useful, because if you're trying to understand kind of the story behind a trade, the story behind price action, the story behind major movements in the market, it's not always the most useful thing in the world to be able to look at, 0x E3 sent money to 0x, 123, right? Like it doesn't really matter. What the way humans think about sort of like this data and this intelligence is in terms of people and in terms of like institutions. Hedge fund A bought a bunch of stock X, right? That's how we typically think about things. And so that's what we want to build with the Arkham platform. It's a way for people to be able to, look at all of this public blockchain information, and rather than it being completely pseudonymous, tie all of this data to real world entities and individuals to the fullest extent possible that we can.
So kind of you've mentioned your vision for the company, but who would you say are going to be your next major customers?
Yeah, so this is multifaceted. As I mentioned, I think sort of overall the way our platform works is that it can be used for a variety of different use cases. So I think one of the more famous parallels to what we're trying to do would be Palantir. So Palantir is a data infrastructure company. They essentially built a platform called Palantir Gotham, as well as one called Palantir Foundry. And essentially what they do is they can take unstructured data from a variety of different customers. Primarily, I think their largest customer now is the U.S. Army, or at least sort of like the military overall. They've also started to do a bunch of work with private institutions such as banks. And they can take all of their unstructured data, make it structured, and then get insights out of it. And so this system, this sort of Palantir, allows them to be able to, take all of these pieces of information that were previously not useful, and then actually sort of use them for a variety of different use cases. So we're trying to do something very similar for the crypto space. And so we're taking all of this kind of very general financial and blockchain information and then making it useful to a variety of different customers. And so that customer base can look from different people. One, we want to launch something for retail. We want to launch something for the public, for anybody to be able to get access to this intelligence and be able to see the full picture of what's going on in the crypto space, to government. and everything in between. And so in terms of what these customers can actually use the product for your average sort of like amateur trader, imagine that you're trading an altcoin, on-chain analytics is incredibly important for this, right? And so in terms of how people think about trading, I think in the traditional financial market, the things that were most important for trading stocks, for example, were two things. Number one, the fundamentals of the business. So how fast is the business growing? What does the user growth look like? What's the business model? How much do they charge? What's the total addressable market? What does the CEO look like, the board, et cetera? How big do I think this business is going to be? And then the second piece is technical analysis. And this is where products like TradingView come in. What do the candlesticks look like? What do the green bars tell me? What do the red bars look like? Is there a bull flag, bear flag, et cetera? Now, crypto has this whole other sort of piece of information that you can use to make trading decisions, which is on-chain information. So we also have the fundamentals. How good of a project is Ethereum? How good of a project is Solana, for example? And then obviously products like TradingView have become super popularized. People are constantly trying to assess, almost in this kind of like astrology kind of way, what is the chart trying to tell me about whether or not this token is going to go up or down? But that doesn't tell the full picture, because the people who are moving the price of these cryptocurrencies are people who are buying and selling. And it's a combination of the team, the investors, retail people, people who have bought off exchanges, people who are trading OTC. There's all these different people who hold this cryptocurrency, and them buying more of it or selling more of it is what's going to cause that asset to go up or down. And so previously, this buying and selling and trading information existed only in the infrastructure of the clients, the government, such as say like the SEC is tracking all of these different like stock trades, and then the broker. So whoever your intermediary is, Robinhood, et cetera. And then in some cases, there's been, situations where hedge funds, for example, will go and purchase all of this kind of order flow data from the brokers themselves. But that's kind of an alternative data set. But in crypto, this is publicly available to anybody. If I make a trade on Uniswap, for example, anybody can see that I made that trade. And so collectively, what we want to do is aggregate all of that information, tell a story about it, and make it easier for people to better predict whether or not things are going to go up or down for the retail customer, right? So that's kind of one thing. The second kind of base customer is startups. So crypto startups, similar to even Reserve Protocol, to be able to learn more about how people are using their cryptocurrency, right? So if I create a cryptocurrency and people are holding it in their MetaMask and just moving it around Ethereum addresses, I don't get as much user information as if they downloaded it off the App Store, for example. And so I hope that a product like Arkham can really help the crypto space to mature and for people to get significantly more customers just via the data that we give them. And then the last part is essentially government. And so on the government side, they want to know how people are moving around money. That's kind of the fundamental premise. The government has done a really great job of sort of generally having really good financial intelligence, right? I mean, 100 years ago, everything was in cash. Now 95% of all money is moved around digitally, just via, wires or Venmo or Monzo or all of these different products. They're all tracked and they're all reported to the government, right? Now, crypto has essentially created this $2 trillion pile of money that is no longer trackable by the government, right? And so that's a really big problem for them because they want to track tax evasion, money laundering, financial terrorism, all of these big kind of risk issues that I mentioned earlier. And so we want to help to be able to do that.
Yeah. It's like right now, well, this morning I saw a tweet about like Joe Biden saying that he's gonna kind of fund or be really interested in doing research about cryptos and the crypto space because around like 15 million Americans are using the space.
Yeah.
So my next question would be kind of like, okay, these massive powers of the world, I'd say like political powers, are trying to get into the space. Have you already been in contact with any government? Do they seem interested in the product that you're offering?
Yeah, I think basically every country in the world right now is looking towards crypto and what they can do with it. One from the perspective I mentioned earlier, which is risk, and then the other one is from a revenue generating perspective, right? I mean, governments care a lot about taking taxes, and it's a lot easier to take people's money when they're getting that money in the form of like fiat or direct deposit from their job. It's a lot harder when they're making that money off of crypto. And so overall, a ton of different countries have been looking at how to kind of regulate the crypto space, or how to create enforcement in the crypto space, or how to gather intelligence generally. And so to that extent, we've kind of been working with a number of different countries in the Middle East, at least trying to get preliminary contracts in place, develop technology for them in order to be able to help them, track better what different citizens in their jurisdiction are doing. We just signed our first contract with a country in the Balkans. And recently we've been put in touch with a number of different Western countries in order to build technology there as well. And so, yeah, a number of different governments are very interested in tracking whether or not people are money laundering and evading taxes using cryptocurrency.
So what would you say are going to be like your, looking to the future, your main bottlenecks or challenges or obstacles that you see Arkham facing towards being integrated in, like fully integrated in the crypto space, in the government space, in the retail space, like being a whole product that everyone can refer to?
Yeah, I think the number one bottleneck, and this is something that I think as an entrepreneur you constantly have to ask yourself is, what are the number one problems that we're facing today or that we're likely to face in the future? I think the number one constraint is actually talent. Oftentimes people think about this in an incorrect way, especially when they're getting started as an entrepreneur. Typically, I think in rank order, the number one kind of excuses or big problems that people tell me for why they can't be an entrepreneur or can't build a business is A, they don't have a good enough idea, is typically like one of the first things that I hear. And then B, they don't know where the money's going to come from, right? Like they're like, I don't have any money right now. I don't know how to raise money. And so therefore I can't build my business. Those are actually probably the two easiest parts of building a company, right? Like the idea isn't very costly. Anybody can really, come up with it. You can tell as many people as you want. The idea is not that difficult to come up with. The execution is the hard part. And then on the money side, there's way more money than there is entrepreneurs and that there is talent, right? Like at this point, like the fundraising market is so hot that anybody can go out and raise, $1 million or something for their seed idea when even, 12 or 15 years ago, it was like impossible for even Airbnb to fundraise in the early days. And they had to basically beg for Y Combinator to give them, I think at the time the standard deal was like $15,000 or something. And so, things have gotten a lot easier for entrepreneurs in kind of the fundraising climate. Ideas are as easy as ever to generate. There are still more things to be built in the world. The really hard part is finding talented, loyal people who are willing to, work on an interesting product, right? So many people want to keep their options open. They don't want to necessarily dedicate themselves to one project. They don't want to put in the long hours that it takes to actually, develop something, or they don't want to build something that's difficult to build. They want to go for something that's easier and is going to make them rich quick. And all these things are really bad mindsets for building a business. So in terms of what our main bottleneck is, I would say it's finding really talented people, especially like engineers, to come in to work on our business.
Here you have a room of them.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe we'll take some names after.
So you mentioned that the funding was easy to get relatively, but from my perspective, I feel like it's the biggest wall, as you say, like that's the outsider perspective. Like you're on your way or second very successful business. And now Team Draper is one of your investors. Could you tell us kind of like the secret to success, if that makes sense? Very cliche question, but how did you get to first, second round investments?
Sure, yeah. So I think in basically every case, the way to get to investors and to venture capitalists more generally is via your network. And you have to find a way to bootstrap it. I think there's no hiding that. I think oftentimes it's very easy for people to say, well, okay, sure, I can fundraise through my network, but right now my network consists of other UCL students. I don't actually know anybody who's willing to give me money to start my business. But the thing is, you have to actually put yourself out there and you have to try and connect with the right people who can then introduce you. Maybe you don't start with the investor themselves. Maybe you start with somebody who has potentially been backed by them in the past. All of the initial investor introductions that we got when I first started Reserve Protocol, all of those came from people who were previously backed by investors who later invested in us, right? So you want to find the people who have already been backed by an investor, which essentially, shows that they believe in them, that they think they're smart, that they think they can do things in the world and have good ideas. And if they think they're smart, can do things in the world and have good ideas enough to back them, surely they'll take an introduction, right? And so you have to find other people, scroll through portfolio companies of the different, venture capital firms that you want to work with and you want to invest in you. Find all of these different companies, try and meet with, the founders, try and get them to understand your idea and figure out, that what you're doing is something good for the world. And then they'll be more than happy to introduce you to a number of different investors and VCs generally, right? I think that's sort of overall been my experience. So you want to try and network to these different people, and then, once you're in the room, I think there's a bunch of different kinds of advice I could give, making a pitch deck, et cetera. But I think the most important thing is just being very honest about your business. And then taking the feedback from the people who reject you, and then trying to figure out, okay, where am I wrong? Where are they wrong? And kind of deliver a very concise pitch that matches up with reality and actually makes sense as a business for them to invest in, and be very clear about how you're going to make them a lot of money.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I'm going to move to a complete different side of the coin, kind of like what's going on in the world at the moment, both in the crypto market and with the whole war of Ukraine. So do you think that Arkham Intelligence can be used against Russia for action enforcement?
So the answer is yes. So essentially, I mentioned that we can be used for a variety of different use cases. You can imagine a world where, a government or financial institution or, anybody who really cares about this present kind of situation from a monetary perspective, they want to try to prevent people who, for example, are sanctioned from being able to use financial services, right? And so part of this is that it's really difficult if you put sanctions on somebody and you say, okay, HSBC or Coots or whatever, you're no longer allowed to serve this particular customer. There's no such entity that you can do that for with Bitcoin or with Ethereum, right? You can't go to the owner of Bitcoin and say, hey, this person is no longer allowed to use Bitcoin. That's not how it works, right? And so, with a product like Arkham, if you have a full sense of, where everybody's assets are and which address belongs to which particular person, you could use the platform to try to isolate that to sanctioned persons, people in countries with lots of money laundering risk or other sorts of forms of compliance issues. And so yes, you could directly use the product in order to try to find different sanctioned people and then prevent them from using on ramps and off ramps in the crypto space, track where they're sending the money, track how they're using it, et cetera. And so to that extent, we've actually been put in touch with the British government last week in order to help them do that.
Yeah. I hope it helps
Yeah.
in some way. And we're all aware that the crypto market is quite low compared to all-time highs. We'll see how it develops with the Russian war, Ukraine-Russian war. What do you think about cryptos and their volatility? And do you think this uncertainty that is often the stereotype or the image that crypto have would affect Arkham in any way?
So I think to answer the latter question first, I think we're basically kind of crypto price agnostic. It doesn't really matter what the present price of the different assets are, as long as people are continuing to trade cryptocurrencies and the trading volume is going up. I think this was something that even during the 2018, 2019, early 2020 bear market was increasingly kind of obvious for me and my co-founder. Basically, even though the prices of crypto assets were going down, the trading volume was going up a lot. And so that was one way, where it was clear to me that the crypto space was still worth working on, right? I mean, you come in, everything goes up a ton, everything goes down 90%. And then you're like, okay, am I in the wrong market? Was I just wrong about this business? And so I think that trend will continue even now, right? Bitcoin is more than 10 times higher today than it was in 2020. And even in 2020, it was 10 times higher than it was, 5 years before that, right? And so the overall kind of trend of the market has been up and to the right, even if there are, these periods of volatility and of uncertainty. In terms of commenting on price, because people always ask me about this, I think overall it's very obvious to me that crypto will be a lot higher in, 5 or 10 years than it is today, in the same way it was a lot lower 5 and 10 years ago, right? I think right now we're going through a process, we're going through a transition. completely changing our monetary policy from this kind of, fiat currency, dollars, pounds, euros, et cetera, to crypto is not going to happen overnight. It may not happen generally. Maybe fiat currencies will continue to exist, and maybe the dollar is no longer the reserve currency, or maybe it still continues and crypto can still grow to be a really, really large market. And so right now, crypto overall is something like 10 to 20% the size of the gold market, right? So if you took all of the gold in the world and you priced it, and then you took all of the crypto in the world and you priced it, crypto would be about 10% of gold's market cap. All of the risk for crypto, or the overwhelming majority of the risk in crypto, in my eyes, is in the past. Crypto and BTC should have died when it was like $5 or like 5 cents or 30 cents, right? Because there was less of a network effect. It wasn't entirely clear whether or not there would be, future adoption generally. There weren't as many pieces of infrastructure, such as exchanges, to be able to get access to it, right? It was mostly peer-to-peer and really difficult to get access to, or, you had to mine it, much more technically challenging, not as much, documentation or propaganda about cryptocurrency generally, and there was much less of a community, right? And so now we're at the point where everybody knows about Bitcoin, at least. Many people are actually involved in it. There's tons of infrastructure to be able to get easy access to it. And the space is, as a whole, worth $1 to $2 trillion. And so I think that's going to continue. I think governments are going to continue printing more money. There's going to be way more inflation. And crypto is going to go up along with everything else.
Well, let's hope so. Okay, amazing. Thank you all so much for coming. And overall, thank you, Miguel and Arkham, for speaking with us.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.